Thank you. That's recording now?
Yep.
Okay, great. It's a little bit heavy, but okay. All right. So we're up to the slide establishing the terms and conditions of mathematical challenge. So how do we establish these? So the choice of test examples that you choose to report in your paper to demonstrate that your method is any good is critical for us to be able to trust the results. And I should say my motivation for this came from editorial work I was doing for journals and the frustration of seeing paper after paper being submitted, which is, here's my new algorithm, and I tested it on these 10 problems, and I'm 0.0001% better than everybody else, and I've got my table of results, and I can show the 10 problems I tested, and I can see my method and somebody else's method, and I put in bold which one is best, and hey, guess what, it's mine. And so please publish my paper. And I got a little bit annoyed about, but why those 10 problems? Your algorithm looks really good, but what about all the ones you didn't show me? And so my thinking started about 15 years ago along those lines. So you've got an algorithm, and you can choose some test problems, and your algorithm may perform perfectly well, and this could be a model or a method or whatever. But you've got an algorithm, and it's performing well, and you think, oh, look, my algorithm's fantastic. Please publish my paper. And you might have to search really, really hard to start to find some examples where it doesn't perform well, and you may not want to tell us about those. But it's very easy to shine a positive light on any algorithm, make it look good, right? But that's not our job as academics. We have to, be honest in how we understand the strengths and weaknesses of algorithms, because every algorithm has a weakness, believe it or not. You might have another algorithm that at first looks terrible, and you're a PhD student, you think, oh my God, I'm never going to get a PhD, my algorithm doesn't work, my great new idea just didn't work. But keep persisting and try to find those examples where it maybe does work. Even if they're examples where everybody else's algorithm works well as well, you need to be able to understand the strengths and weaknesses and then weigh up whether or not there's actually any merit. Maybe your new method has a unique strength where no one else does. And maybe for those instances, they're actually not that important. They're trivial problems, but you have to try to find that out. So trustworthy test examples have to be unbiased, diverse, challenging, discriminating, and real-world-like. And if we don't have those properties of a set of instances, I would say that your results are just going to be inconclusive at best and possibly dangerous in the worst case if the application of this method is something critical. So the motivation, as I said, for instance, space analysis was really coming from not being very happy with standard research practice as I was seeing it in the papers that were submitted to journals that I was on the editorial board for. So particularly in operations research, my field in optimization, that was the standard practice. Here's my new travelling salesman problem algorithm, and I tested it on these 10 problems. And so we typically report algorithm performance on average across some set of chosen test instances. And if the algorithm's performance is better on average than some existing methods, then you'll say that the algorithm is a success. So what's wrong with that? My first concern is I don't always understand why those test instances were chosen. Typically, they look like they've been hand-selected conveniently, or somebody has used an entire suite that everybody uses, but they've just inherited that from a website, and they've used it because everyone's expected to use it because the previous papers used it, and no one ever stops and says, why do we have these instances? Where did they come from? Who made these up? And are they still fit for purpose? Just because somebody 20 years ago made up some test problems to test their new algorithm, and then everybody now has to use those ones, we have to ask whether or not they were really as diverse and interesting as could be. So scrutinising the common benchmarks in your field is a really important thing to do periodically. It's important that everybody uses the same problems for fair comparisons, but we do have to ask whether they're adequate. So I would say the test instances should ideally be demonstrably diverse, and we'll talk more about how you demonstrate that diversity, lacking bias. They should be challenging for the algorithms. We don't learn anything if we have a selection of test problems where every algorithm out there gets the same answers. We're not learning anything. And they should be helping us discriminate between different algorithm performances to see the unique strengths and weaknesses. And ideally, if you'd like to say that your algorithm or model or whatever is fit for the real world, we should make sure these test instances include real world like instances. So my second concern with standard practice is this averaging thing. So you've got a collection of problems and you report at the bottom of the table, on average, this is my method, how it performed in some performance metric, classification accuracy or whatever, and this is how somebody else has performed on average. And that's what we do, but averages are not nuanced enough. the algorithm that's best on average probably has some weaknesses, and we don't even try to find it because it was better on average at end of story. But the weaknesses are there. Maybe there's a class of instances where it actually had terrible performance, and it's amazing that it's still got slightly better on average considering that weakness. Let's expose that weakness and try to understand it. There's a thing called the no free lunch theorem. Every method on average, if you look across the whole set of all possible problems, is probably going to look the same. It's about the pockets of suitability. Every algorithm might have something that it's exploiting, that if the instance comes along that's got those same characteristics, bingo, it's a perfect match. But if it doesn't have those characteristics, you can't expect that algorithm to perform any better on average than another. So how do the characteristics of different types of instances affect algorithm behaviour? What are the conditions where we expect one algorithm to be better than another? And which instances are going to have the properties that make an algorithm be able to show off what it can do? And are our chosen benchmarks enabling us to see that? Are they also revealing where our algorithm can't handle certain characteristics? So I would say that algorithm performance should ideally be reported not on average across all types of instances, but based on instance properties. That will be more insightful. So how do we do that? The problem with standard algorithm testing is that I consider it to be in the darkness of all these black boxes. Not only is many times the algorithm itself a black box, we feed in some suite of test examples, and outcomes at the other end is some measure of trust, performance, classification accuracy for machine learning, or gap to known optimal solution for optimization people, or whatever. Some kind of performance measure that says this is good performance or this is bad performance. People have been complaining for a long time, though. John Hooker said in the field of optimization, we have it all wrong, the way we test heuristics with this competitive testing idea. It's not insightful enough. The reality is that this suite of test examples is also treated like a black box. We don't get in there and crack it open and really try to understand what we're actually choosing to test. And this trust metric, when we use on average performance, I'd say we're also hiding a whole lot of information from really helping us understand strengths and weaknesses. So we're dealing with all these black boxes with the standard way we test things. So the first problem is, how do we crack this open to scrutinise these test examples and ensure that they're enough and trustworthy and have all those properties that I talked about in terms of diversity and lacking bias and things? Second problem is, what do we do about this on average thing, where averaging is hiding all sorts of sins, and just because something's good on average doesn't mean it's good always, and we need to do better than that. So my solution, the tool that we've developed, it's instance-based analysis is the methodology, and MATILDA is the tool that helps people do it. MATILDA is an acronym. It stands for Melbourne Algorithm Test Instance Library with Data Analytics. I am the acronym queen. I have lots of acronyms in my professional life. I don't do acronyms in my personal life, that would be weird. But in my professional life, I have lots of acronyms for things, including Optima, the ARC training centre that I run, is also an acronym. But anyway, MATILDA is going to help us crack this open to visualise the diversity and the bias and things that might... where are these test examples within the space of all possible test problems, for test instances for this particular problem? What is the mathematical boundary that defines where an instance can lie and where it's impossible to have one? And we want to be testing within that boundary. And MATILDA is going to help us see the performance of algorithms, not summarised on average with a number, but help us see across this space the strengths and weaknesses within that bound. So it's not just me that's been complaining. People have been complaining about standard practice for a long, long time, and it's no one's fault. We haven't had the tools and methodologies to do it any other way. All right, so that has been my mission for the last 15 years, to try to provide something that helps us move forward. So the goals of instance-based analysis then would be to understand and visualise strengths and weaknesses of algorithms or models or methods or whatever you want to generalise this to. But I'll talk about algorithms. Which algorithms should be used, when and why? We want to be able to have more objective assessment of how good an algorithm is, instead of here's my 10 problems, please trust me that it's a great algorithm. Right? How do we get that more objective? Well, we have to be objective by saying it's not based on, my conclusions aren't based on what I chose to show you, it's based on the whole set, right? How do I show you how things are likely to perform across the whole space when I don't actually have the computational resources to explore that whole space? So there's some inference that's going to go on. We want to try to improve research practice. We want to establish algorithmic trust. It's a real buzzword at the moment of how we humans can learn to trust algorithms. And we want to avoid choosing the wrong algorithm at the wrong time. The other thing that instance-based analysis helps us do is not just scrutinise how good an algorithm is, but it looks at the benchmarks that we have available at the moment. And within this mathematically defined boundary of what a test problem could possibly look like, where are we actually testing? Where do test problems currently live? And where do we have big gaps in our knowledge? And how can we generate new test problems that live anywhere I need them to live in this space so that I can create a fully comprehensive suite with controllable characteristics? So we can expand the benchmarks and drive further insights. So that's what we're trying to achieve. I'm going to take you through the methodology with this simple example alongside. So even if you're not an optimization problem, you'll understand what I'm talking about. So university timetabling, we know it's hard. That's why we sometimes have 8 a.m. lectures and 6 p.m. lectures and things, because this tightly constrained problem of where to place everything to minimise clashes, right? So the data that I'm working with here, I have 2 algorithms for university timetabling. I'll call them algorithm A and B at the moment. And I have 8,199 test examples. This is 8,199 times that instances where a university has to solve the problem for this semester, right? Universities, let's say around the world, different semesters. Every university is different in terms of the number of students it has, the number of large lecture theatres it has, the rules it has, the number of staff it has, what teaching loads are like, how many courses or subjects a lecturer is teaching in one semester, varies around the world. So these all create different challenges. Some of those timetabling problems may be relatively easy, quick to solve. Some of them may be more complicated because there's more constraints. We're reporting the success of these 2 methods based on how many student clashes on average across all those 8,199 instances. What is the average number of student clashes? Okay, so that's our setup. If I crunch the numbers on these 2 algorithms and I tell you that of those 8,199, so this is a typical table you would see in a paper, right? On average, algorithm A wins 25% of the time, algorithm B wins 29% of the time, and they are tied. They give exactly the same result 45% of the time. So pretty comprehensive. It's a very large number of experiments that were run. And what is my conclusion? Which algorithm would you buy? If you were in charge of purchasing some timetabling software for your university, which algorithm would you go with? You'd go with B. You wouldn't be. You maybe price would come into it. They're kind of similar, right? But let's say B is better. Okay? But algorithm B, while it's better on average, doesn't mean it's going to be good for your university. It's good on average. Let's try and figure this out. Matilda is going to crack this open, this suite of, because these are just numbers or they're just file names, right? I've got a big spreadsheet, 8,199 rows and which one performed best. Doesn't help me understand what I should do. And Matilda's going to show us the strengths and weaknesses of these 2 algorithms. Okay, so let's go through more detail now. So the 2 algorithms we're looking at, one is a taboo search and one is a simulated annealing heuristic. And the data, and these were 2 algorithms that were submitted as part of an international timetabling competition. So they're top algorithms from top researchers around the world, from Germany and Japan. The 8,199 instances are made up of 21 real-world instances from an Italian university that were part of this competition. They were submitted as real-world instances. 4,492 randomly generated instances from Edmund Burke in the UK has a timetabling synthetic instance generator. We use that. And then 3,686 ones that we generated by taking Burke's generator and modifying it using some machine learning techniques to make the synthetic instances more real-world-like, so more like the Italian ones, because we saw a big difference. The synthetic ones had nothing to do. They looked nothing like the real-world ones. So that paper... that paper there in Operations Research in 2013, we took the generator, we used machine learning techniques to learn the difference between the instances we were getting and the real world ones and modified the parameters of the generator so that over time we got more real world-like instances. Okay, so we've got a large collection of different types of instances, and here's a more detailed breakdown now, same percentages as before, but just breaking it down by the 3 types of instances. And so you can say, okay, well, if you were the Italian university, oh, look, it's really kind of tied. 8 times simulated annealing's better, 10 times taboo search is better, 3 times they're tied. I don't know, let's go with taboo search. You can see that actually if you had more like our real-world-like instances, simulated annealing is a little bit better. But we can do better than this as well. So as a spoiler alert, both of these methods will have some weaknesses. There are clearly defined classes of instances where you would not use one of the methods. Okay, so the questions that are kind of guiding this research, no matter what you work in, these are the questions that you could be asking. How do instance features help us understand strengths and weaknesses of algorithms? What makes an instance hard for my algorithm or somebody else's algorithm? What can I measure? How can we infer and visualise algorithm performance across this huge instance space? How do I mathematically define the set of all possible instances? What do all possible timetabling problems look like? How do I measure objectively the relative performance of algorithms? How easy or hard are the benchmarks? How diverse are they? And how can I generate new instances that are going to give me more insights? Right? So these are the kinds of questions in the back of my mind for 15 years as we've been developing this methodology. So a lot of these are mathematical challenges, mathematical and statistical challenges. So to visualise the space of all possible instances of the problem, I have to figure out the features that affect the difficulty of an instance. I want to be able to see the hard instances are over there and the easy instances are over here. But I need to be able to say what makes it easy or hard. I need to be able to mathematically define the boundaries of that feature space. Right? So I'm measuring some features of the instances, and then that's creating in a high dimensional feature space the limits of what might be possible. And then I'm going to be able to project that to 2D to be able to see it, and that the boundary will also project. So that will be my theoretical boundary of where all possible instances could lie. I'm going to scrutinise the adequacy of benchmarks within that instance space. I'm going to identify regions where we need new instances. I'm going to look at the performance of algorithms in different parts of the space, and I'm going to identify the regions. I'm going to use machine learning to be able to say, I have evidence of good performance over here. Let me generalise that boundary and say, where do I predict good performance will extend, even though I don't have evidence of it, right? What is the generalisation of that region? And I'll call that the footprint, where an algorithm is expected to perform well. And we can do, cross-validation techniques to test whether or not that's true. And we can, so that's quantitatively, we can measure the area of the footprint that an algorithm occupies. And you have a better algorithm if your algorithm's footprint is larger than somebody else's, or that your footprint lies in a region of the space that's more interesting, right? Or unique, where you have a footprint in a region of the space where no one else has a footprint. Publish your paper then. That's a contribution. But if you have an algorithm, and I don't care what you called it, you might have called it some fancy nature-inspired name, but you have an algorithm that's got a footprint that's exactly the same as some other algorithm, right? You're not making a unique contribution. You might have called your algorithm something new, but essentially the data is telling us that it performs just as well on instances as the other algorithm and doesn't perform well on the same instance as the other one doesn't. It's pretty much the same algorithm by a different name. This is the kind of thing we need to be able to see to understand unique contributions. And of course we can do automated algorithm selection, say, okay, now I've got a problem, which algorithm should I use? Which part of the space is it in? Whose algorithm is best here? And all of that. And we can design new algorithms to make sure we have footprints that span the entire space. So the framework that we build all of this on is the algorithm selection problem framework of John Rice in 1976. So inside the dotted box here is what John Rice was doing in 1976. You have a set of problem instances, I. So X is a particular problem instance, one of my timetabling problems, and I is the whole set that I have to study, 8,199. I can extract some features of those problems that summarise their difficulty. I have some algorithms, algorithm A and B, and I have a performance metric, average student clashes. And John Rice was basically saying, hey, can we learn to predict, given some features of an instance, which algorithm is going to perform best? Choose the algorithm that maximises the performance metric. That's your winner. Pick the winning algorithm. That's what John Rice was on about. I've extended that framework to be able to answer the questions that I was interested in, which is not just the 8,199 problems that I've got on my computer to learn from. What about this broader, the entire space of all possible problems? Any problem that I could call a timetabling problem. How do I figure out the subset that I should study? how can I visualise the entire space, this whole instance space? How can I measure these footprints in the instance space and infer performance for any instance in my theoretically possible set? So these data components, I have a set of instances, I have a set of features, I have a set of algorithms, and I have a set of performance metrics. IFYA, IFYA, that's our metadata. We're going to learn some stuff from the experimental results that we collect. So we're going to run lots of algorithms on lots of problems and learn something from that process about strengths and weaknesses. And I always like to say, if you don't like it, you can change it. There's no reason why you're stuck with that. There's no reason why I'm stuck with those two algorithms, those 8,199 instances and my chosen set of features. I can experiment and play with things because my quest here is to learn more. So I can always dream up new instances or collect new instances. I can think of new features to measure. I can put some different algorithms. If I'm not happy with what I'm learning, I can change it. If you don't like it, you can change it. So when we think about features, what makes the problem hard, let me come back to our timetabling metadata. So we have instances are 8,199 and they come from 3 different sources. The features, I'm not going to go into the details, but I use 32 features that are based on the underlying graph colouring problem. So if you know anything about university timetabling, a lot of the optimisation formulations come from treating it like a graph colouring problem where periods of the week are nodes and 2 periods are connected by an edge if there's a reason they can't occur at the same time because it's the same teacher involved in both classes or whatever. And so it turns into a graph colouring where the colour represents the period, the day of the week and the time. Right? So the question is how to colour the nodes in a way that there's no clashes. So there's lots of, once we establish it as a graph colouring problem, there's lots of properties of the graph we can measure, obviously density and connectivity measures and various things. We have 2 graphs. We have one for teachers and one for students measuring their clashes. And then we have some other properties of the timetabling problem, such as the number of one-room events. How many events or classes can only be scheduled in one room? That's going to make it a tough timetabling problem. Whereas if you have lots of classes that could be scheduled in many different rooms, more flexibility, more freedom, etc. This affects the difficulty. The slackness is the ratio of the number of seats we need across the semester to the number of seats available. Right? The performance metric is the total student clashes, and I'm going to define a good performance to be, out of the 2 algorithms that I'm considering for this little study, an algorithm performs well, if it has the best performance of the 2. If you get fewer student clashes, I will call you good and I'll call the other one bad. I know it's very binary, but let's just go with that. And I have my 2 algorithms. Okay, so this is the metadata that we're going to be working with. So then the methodology, just quickly, involves these steps. So you collect some metadata, and this for any problem, for any algorithm, model, method, whatever. Maybe for some of you, it's going to be relevant to generalise and think about how you could do this. So you create the instance space, you visualise some benchmarks, you visualise how the methods perform, you explain why they're good or bad in different regions, and you can automate the whole process. And then afterwards, you might get some insights into new features you might have now be able to think that are really important, new instances that you need to fill some gaps, and maybe some new algorithm ideas as well. And you rinse and repeat. And so each one of those involves devising various things. So let's just go through those steps with timetabling. So creating the instance space. So which features should be selected? In MATILDA, with the code, we have a feature selection process that does this for you. It does some correlation analysis, some clustering, and then it ends up choosing some features that are most predictive of how the methods are performing and what's helping you distinguish one from the other. Skip all the details. The details are in our machine learning paper in 2018, particularly in the appendix with the mathematical stuff to justify the projection algorithm we use. But basically for timetabling, of the 32 initial features that I had, so we just dreamt up a whole lot of crazy features, don't know if they're going to work, it selected 5 of them that best separate the good and bad performances. And so this is my projection matrix. So in the end, an instance was originally summarised as a point in a 32-dimensional space. Forget that, we've now got a point in a 5-dimensional space. And from 5D, we project to 2D using this linear transformation. And these numbers have been worked out by solving an optimisation problem, which looks like this, But basically, it's trying to say, what is the optimal way to take an instance summarised by this 5-dimensional vector? So each one of these is just a feature. So every instance is a 5-dimensional vector, and I'm projecting to a point in a 2D plane, Z1, Z2. And this transformation is the one that helps me see linear trends in the resulting instance space most effectively. So linear trends in performance. In other words, the performance metric going from good to bad, or the features going from small values to large values, because I want that linear interpretability, so when I see the instance space, I can kind of read off directions and trends. You'll see what I mean in a minute. So now I have the instance space, and this is what it looks like. So the red boundary is my mathematically defined, it's the projection of my boundary in the 5-dimensional space, considering the upper and lower bounds of my features. Now, in graph colouring, graph theory, we know a lot of theoretical upper and lower bounds of different graph properties. In other fields, maybe you don't have theoretical knowledge of upper and lower bounds, you just have experimental data. I can see the smallest value I've ever seen and the largest value I've ever seen. So we have to use those for certain fields. But the mathematical boundary here is considering the upper and lower bounds of all my features, creating a bounding box, and then projecting to 2D. These are my 8,199 timetabling instances. A point is a whole instance. The blue ones are the Italian university real-world ones. The pink ones are the random generator from Edmund Burke in the UK, and the yellow ones are the ones that we created by taking the generator and adapting it to make it produce more blue-like ones. So you can see we succeeded. You can see that the yellow ones have more in common with blue than the originally pink, like we pushed it, right? But those are the 8,199 instances we're working with. First comment is these are not as diverse as could be. There's lots of white space out here. We don't know. In theory, you could have a timetabling problem that has those properties, but we don't have it to study. So do they fill the boundary? Not quite. Are they diverse, lacking bias? Do they span real world? Well, the real world Italian ones are over here, but that's not to say, and we don't have many of them, and the generator's not producing those, but that's not to say that Australian ones are over there or Swiss ones or other things, right? So there's still a lot we have to figure out here. So within that instance space, we can now, so that was just colour coding by where they came from. But now let's colour code by how algorithms performed, the two algorithms. So in which regions do I have evidence that an algorithm performs well? And can I statistically generalise that? So blue is good performance, meaning it was better than the other one, and orange means it was worse. So the first thing to note is, so this is simulated annealing and this is taboo search. Remember, taboo search was better on average, right? So the one that's meant to be better is over here. But you can see all that orange at the top there. There's certain instances in the top part of this space where it is not best, even though it's best on average. And this comes down to a question of density, right? There's certain regions here that we have maybe an overrepresentation of certain types of instances where taboo search is better, and maybe that is dominating the averaging effect. But I can clearly see now that there's a whole region of instances up at the top where taboo search is not the best method. Simulated annealing is the best method. It's a little hard for us to see even in this 2D plot because I think blue is plotted on top of orange or something. Anyway, it's a little hard. We can use machine learning, which can see more clearly than us what's going on. And when we ask it to kind of separate the blues and oranges in some kind of statistically significant, confident way, this is what it comes up with. So taboo search is predicted to be bad in this top region and good below, and simulated annealing is predicted to be good in the top, good at the bottom. So they're both good at the bottom. Those are the easy instances. And simulated annealing has a weakness through the middle band there. Okay, so that's what the support vector machine has interpreted. And now if we look at these footprints and we say, well, what's the sum of these blues and what's this area of this blue, just sort of using areas of convex hulls and various things, we can say that, yeah, this area is bigger. It's 0.65 as opposed to 0.58. The precision of the support vector machines over here, if it says taboo search will be good, it is correct 89.6% of the time. There's a lot of confetti here, right? It's not as clear cut. I interpret that to mean the features are not quite right. Those 5 features are not quite separating well enough yet, the good and bad performances. There's more work we can do on that, and we have. whose footprint overlaps the real-world instances. Remember, the Italian ones were in the top right corner. Actually, both of them are predicted to be bad. Not bad, but it means the support vector machine is not prepared to say, pick me, I'm going to be good, right? It was too ambiguous. So the support vector machine sitting on the fence when it comes to these Italian instances is not willing to recommend either method, which I think is perfectly reasonable given what we've seen. Does each algorithm have anything unique to say? Yeah, they're both the same at the bottom, but there's a difference in the top and the middle region of which method you should use. So step 4, we now try to explain those strengths and weaknesses. Well, what is it about those instances at the top or in the middle that makes them different, right? And so we can look one feature at a time at the distribution. Yellow is a high value of the feature and blue is a small value of the feature. And so we can see at the top, for instance, we have high slack, and that's where taboo search had a weakness. We can see at the bottom, where both methods found it very easy, the event degree teacher connectivity graph theory property is high. You know, just you can interpret things like that. I don't want to spend time because this is not your area of interest. But you can see the idea that you can scrutinise these plots and you can kind of qualitatively summarise what types of instances lie where. Okay. And of course, we can wrap all this together into automated algorithm selection, the pick a winner kind of game. And we can basically combine these two SVMs together and say, what's your recommendation? Well, at the top, you should use simulated annealing. At the bottom, you should use taboo search or simulated annealing, but we had the support vector machine for taboo search had more confidence, so we'll go with that one. In the middle, you should use taboo search. And we have this grey zone out here where neither method was completely confident. So, don't know. We need more evidence there. Okay. So, and let me just say, this is what I always look for. So if I just use taboo search all the time for every instance, I would have picked the winner 74.4% of the time. Or if I just used simulated annealing, I'd be right 70.6% of the time. But if I pick the method based on this instance space analysis, I'm right 83.9% of the time. So it's helping to choose between them. Okay, and then we can do a whole lot of insights afterwards into, what do I think about my instances now? I've got lots of conclusions, but I'm not going to go into the details. But obviously I can see some insufficient number of instances around the Italian ones. I can see that those Italian university instances have different properties to the other ones. I can get insights into the algorithms. I can say which one performs best under which condition, right? So simulated annealing performs better when this particular node degree property is low and slack is high, etc. Okay, so it helps if you work in the area to get some insights. But this is an iterative process. So we then, we got ideas for more features, more classes of instances. We generated a whole heap of new synthetic instances. We looked at different algorithms. This was work I did with some collaborators around the world who took the instance space analysis and used it to generate more stuff, more insights, and look at different algorithms, exact and heuristic algorithms. The blue ones here are the ones that I just showed you before, the 8,199. And so the grey ones are now new instances that my collaborators have generated. And so that's people in Vienna, and Andrea is in Udine, the university that provided the instances. So the point is it continues, right? And so this methodology has helped us generate a whole lot of new instances and test other algorithms and get some good insights that were in that paper. Okay, so that was an introduction to how we do it. The tool, MATILDA, as I said, is an acronym. And I just wanted to quickly whip through some more examples. I don't know what all your interests are. I know some people do quantum computing and stuff like that. I work on quantum computing as well, trying to use instance space analysis to show quantum advantage. So, when you're using quantum algorithms like QAOA and stuff like that to try to solve optimization problems, it kind of depends on the characteristics of the instance, whether or not quantum is likely to have an advantage over conventional computing. So I'm working with Lloyd Hollenberg and people like that on helping to prove quantum advantage for certain types of problems. Graph colouring, I'll just say this is a instance, and each one of these panes is just showing the location of different classes of graphs that come from sports scheduling problems or timetabling problems, graphs that have been generated, bipartite graphs, etc. So you can see where they lie in the space. and you can then see which methods are best for different types of instances. We also, this was the first work we did to figure out how we can generate new instances to lie anywhere I want them to lie in that space. And so that's a sort of powerful part of the methodology, where you assess that the benchmarks are not enough, that I've got gaps in my space, and we use genetic algorithms to evolve new instances of a problem that lie at a target location, and genetic algorithms kind of minimise the distance to the target over time, so they lie where you need them to lie. And so this picture shows you, for instance, for 100 node graphs, the red ones are randomly generated 100 node graphs that have certain properties that mean that they lie in this curve. The green ones were coming from a generator from Joe Culberson in Canada, who had generators that were meant to be producing more diverse types of graphs. And he succeeded. They're a little bit more diverse than random, but you can see they're not as diverse as the whole space would tell us. And the blue ones are ones that we have evolved to fill the space. And so they're completely different graph structures in terms of their density and their algebraic connectivity and their spectral properties. So that was the paper where we sort of showed how you can generate synthetic problem instances that lie anywhere you need them to lie within this mathematical boundary. We've done stuff in time series forecasting. So this is with Rob Heinemann. In the forecasting field, if you're in the business of time series forecasting, there are benchmarks that you're supposed to use. There's the M3 competition instances, about 3,000 or 4,000 time series that all have different characteristics. You know, every forecasting method, if it's just got like this nice seasonal trend, is going to be able to accurately forecast what comes next, but depending on, you know, chaotic dynamics and various things, different techniques may fail. So this is another example where we took existing instances and expanded the benchmarks to create more diversity. We've done stuff in black box optimization, these landscapes, you know, you've got some rugged landscape and you're trying to find the minimum of that. So you're in physics, imagine it's an energy function or whatever, and you're trying to find the minimum energy. Quantum people do that. And depending on what the landscape looks like, your optimization technique may or may not find a global minimum or an acceptable local minimum. So if you're working in that space and you're looking at optimization techniques, stochastic gradient descent or whatever techniques for finding the minimum of a function, it depends on what the landscape of that function looks like. What are the characteristics of that landscape that we could measure that would help us understand different landscapes and the success of different methods for finding the minimum? So the blue ones are the benchmarks that everybody uses. The red ones are our attempt to recreate those, starting from scratch and evolving, using genetic programming, evolving functions that have the same characteristics as the blue ones as a test. And then the green ones were where we just went crazy and said, okay, give us a completely different function that looks nothing like the existing benchmarks that optimization algorithms may actually find interesting and challenging. And so the result of that is this artwork that the University of Melbourne has turned into merchandise. So we have tote bags, posters, greeting cards. So this was some artwork we created in 2019 as an unexpected outcome of my ARC Laureate project. I'll just super quickly try to explain. Each one of these is a 2x2 contour plot. So you've got an X and a Y, and you have a function of X and Y. And we want interesting functions of X and Y. And we give a genetic programming method the most limited mathematical vocabulary of what it can do to the X and Y. It can combine X and Y with arithmetic operators, addition, subtraction, multiplication, division. It can use trigonometric functions, sine, cos, and hyperbolic tangent. I think we allowed an exponential function and maybe an absolute function. And then we said, go, create functions of X and Y that live at a particular location. Give me a function that lives out here, that's got a landscape that takes it out there when I measure its features. And we got these incredibly diverse, you won't be able to see it, you can come and look at my bag later, but some of these are incredible. They look like fractals, they look like something you'd see under a microscope. They're amazing considering the limited mathematical vocabulary. And then we had so many beautiful images that I wanted to print some for my office, but I couldn't decide which one I loved most, like who's your favourite child. And so then I decided, actually no, there's so many that are beautiful, I'm going to do a montage. So 17 by 18, that's 306 beautiful images. And then it was like, oh my God, what's the most beautiful random placement of 306 images in a 17 by 18 array? So then I did 10 random ones, and everyone who came to my office, I said, which one of these do you like best? And no one had a favourite. The one in the middle is random. But then some people were saying, oh, it's a pity, you see that blue cross there? It's a pity that blue cross doesn't extend, right? It just stops. Some people wanted the blue cross to extend like it does over here. Extends, and this blue, dark blue meanders. So this dark blue is the minimum of the function and yellow is the maximum of the function. And when you join all these functions together in a montage, you now have this global dark blue river that meanders across the whole global landscape. Some people found the random one annoying because the dark blue didn't continue, and some people found the blue cross in the middle there annoying because they didn't want to see it. They wanted it destroyed. So the one on the left, we destroy that dark blue connectivity. The one on the right, we enhance the dark blue connectivity. Just with human eye, 30 swaps of the random to increase connectivity, 30 swaps to decrease connectivity. Being an optimization researcher, of course, it was natural for us to get an optimization algorithm to automate that process. 20,000 iterations, either way, it couldn't come close to anything as aesthetically beautiful as I can subjectively say our artwork is. So this is the artwork, Negentropy Triptych. It's the negative of entropy. It's the emergence of order from chaos, and it's a triptych because there's three, and it's basically making a statement that human aesthetic taste is on a spectrum. And there's a whole lot of literature that I read about aesthetics and psychology, and basically it's very aligned to your preference of whether you're a left or a right. It's very aligned to your order-disorder preference. Take a look at your office and see how messy it is, and you'll know whether or not you probably prefer this one or this one. I love this one because I like order and everything in control. My daughter, who's a musician, incredibly creative, she hated this. She hated the idea that I was forcing her eye to follow something, and she wanted to appreciate each individual image without distraction of some kind of underlying structure. Different people, that's what the artwork's trying to say. So if you'd like to purchase a tote bag, you can go to the University of Melbourne gift shop. Anyway, machine learning, we've done instance spaces for machine learning as well, and shown that actually the UCI repository data sets that everybody uses, and also AutoML, not that diverse really. There's more we can do. It's actually kind of hard. It's challenging to, computationally challenging to generate diverse classification data sets. Yeah, there's a lot of stuff I can talk about, but I'm running out of time. So these are some of the problems we have applied instance space analysis to ourselves or with collaborators around the world. I'm starting to get a lot of referee requests from people I didn't even know were using instance space analysis. So we'll expand this list soon once those papers get accepted, and even though I'm not a co-author of them, we'll sort of add them as library problems. But for each one of these, you can download the data sets that we've created that are creating these comprehensive sets. So diverse things, lots of stuff in optimization, of course, because that's where I started, but also lots of learning, machine learning and model fitting kind of problems, even software testing as well. I did want to talk, but I've run out of time, about this facial age estimation work because it's kind of cute, but we've run out of time. Yeah, I'll stop there, I think.
Thank you, Kate, for a great talk, and thank you for putting up with our tech issues.
No worries.
Thank you for advertising the merchandise. Do we have any questions for Kate? Chris?
Hi, thanks very much. That was really interesting, and I was sort of thinking about how I could apply it to some of the things that I do in the field of sort of nonlinear waves and sort of analysis of those, and I was thinking about how I would set up the problem space. And it sort of occurred to me that it would be really easy for biases to creep in there rather than the feature space and the like. So you mentioned with the graphs where there's these nice sort of solid bounds. Are there some kind of ways that you have in mind as to making the problem space sensible or the right kind of problem space to think in?
It's a very iterative process, and sometimes you don't know the answer to that question until you see what's out there and you can see the bias, and then you sort of think, oh, you know, we don't have any instances that have these properties. Is it possible for them to have it? Could I create one? And then suddenly your space looks completely different, right? So it is an iterative process. I should say, just in terms of generalising to your field and other fields, John Rice, that I mentioned in 1976 with the algorithm selection problem, he was an applied mathematician, and for the next decade, what he applied this idea to, of just learning to, basically he's interested in learning to predict the winner. A lot of what he applied that to was PDE modelling and methods for solving PDE solvers. And so if you think about a PDE and you think about what could I measure about a PDE that's going to say that this solver is going to be more effective than this solver, things like condition number and various properties, right? So a lot of the early papers in the 1980s or so applying this was to problems like that. And so, and also like linear system solvers, you know, AX equals B, properties with the matrix A. You know, there's a lot of stuff that can help determine the instance space. We haven't done instance spaces for those problems, but we could certainly go back and do that. And so sometimes you're looking at a problem and you're thinking, what could I possibly measure that would take me to the extremes of what the problem is like, and hoping that the methods you're using might demonstrate their extreme behaviour as well. So I don't have an answer to your question, apart from the fact that I know it's an iterative process, and you sometimes just start with what you think the extremes are, and then you see how things respond, and then you try to be even more extreme. And I always say to people when they're thinking about the features to measure, it's this complex interplay. I can think creatively about features to measure, but if I don't have the instances that are going to show whether that feature value got extreme values, you know, if you've only got instances where you measure something like condition number, and it turns out for the set of instances that actually it only changes, like, you know, it's like 1.1 to 1.3 or something, it's, you know, you need different instances to reveal extreme behaviours sometimes. So it's this interplay and iterative process between more instances, more features, more instances, more features. But you know you've succeeded when you get clear separation. Yeah.
I just wondered, have you managed to influence your own university's timetable?
That's an area that any sensible person stays well away from. The number of mathematics departments that over the years have been consulted about what they should do. I do know some people who have got dragged into that world, but no. The vendors are pretty strong. It's different. Like when I first started out in the 1990s, I think a lot of mathematics departments got asked to help with the timetabling, but these days there's so many commercial tools out there that I don't think they're interested in what us academics think anymore.
So at first I got very excited. I'm a hydrodynamic.
Sorry, you're no longer excited.
I
couldn't maintain it.
I don't see the so I do hydrodynamic simulations of colliding stars. They're very complex, and you have no idea at the end whether what you got is right or wrong. And so you have test problems, like classic hydrodynamic test problems, where you know the analytical solution, so you kind of know whether at least that little bit is okay. And in the papers, you find people saying, oh, this code, I got this fantastic simulation, the movies are amazing, and it predicts all these features. You don't know, of course, whether it's right or wrong. And I have these test problems, and because they are passed, I'm good, right? And there's no quantification of, first of all, how good they are, how many you got, whether they're the right ones, to what feature they pertain when you're actually analyzing your actual solution.
Yeah.
So then the question, so immediately I thought, that's some more systematic approach. But all these problems seem to be very well defined. Like if the face is either recognized or not, you can do tests of that.
Yes.
But other problems are very open-ended and far more maybe complex in the topology problems they have within them.
Yes.
So do you see a possible...
Yeah, I don't think I can help you, unfortunately. I remember when I was head of the maths department at Monash and I had astrophysicists in my department, I remember a frustrating conversation with someone who was developing new models for, you know, the expanding universe. And I remember just having a debate with him about the truth. Like, but you don't know the truth, so how can you say your model is any good? Like, I couldn't get my head around the fact that he could publish a paper on a model that couldn't be validated in any way. I couldn't understand.
It might be down the line.
Yeah,
right?
it might
because
be.
It might fit some observation, but
Yeah.
at first you'd probably
Yeah,
don't.
no, I mean, you know, I've collaborated with stem cell researchers and all sorts of biology people before we have mathematical models of things and we optimize the parameters to match the wet lab experiments, right? That's the style that I'm used to. Here's my model and I can validate it somehow. Yeah. And I got a little bit like, what? You know, models of the universe and you don't know the truth.
But that's kind of what we do in modelling the universe, right? We have models and we match it to what we see out there.
Yeah.
It's not necessarily a cell in the biological lab, but it is like.
But in hydrodynamics, you have real world examples that you can validate with, for example,
yeah.
right?
Yeah.
So then the question is whether you can hook onto those examples to extrapolate into parameter spaces that are really different or bigger dimensions.
Yes. Yes, and so I guess what you're asking here is if you have some data, but you have very limited data probably, and then you've got all this white space in the thing that you want to be able to say which model is going to be most accurate or whatever, but you have no evidence to support it. And I guess it just comes down to a sample size machine learning kind of question of you can do it, but you know, are the support vector machines, for instance, going to be any good when there's such limited data there? And you can't generate synthetic data. I mean, so the idea that, you know, I said we can generate a new data point anywhere we like, for some applications that makes no sense. For a graph it makes sense. For a human face it doesn't make sense. I'm going to say my data is biased. You know, if I'd done that case study, you would have seen how biased the data was. When we first started working in this field, it was all Caucasian faces. And our methods were very good on Caucasian faces, but had horrible errors on anyone that wasn't. These days, we have much bigger databases, more racial diversity and everything. But it doesn't make sense for me to say, oh, I don't have any faces out there. Let me synthetically generate a face. I can do that. But then what? I'm doing age estimation. What age do I put on that? I don't know the truth. It is a fake person. I don't know how old they are, right? So in some areas, it makes no sense. And I suspect in your area, it would make no sense to synthetically generate data. But you do have some observational data, but it's very, very limited. And then I think you're going to find that these techniques probably aren't going to be so useful if you've got such limited experiments. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Sorry.
Thank you.
I think we have two more quick questions. Bernard?
Yeah, I'll choose one quick one because I have more than one. Sorry. Just a quick one. In MATILDA, at the end, you said there's a section where you can improve and actually design a new algorithm, possibly based on the result. So there is
That's not it. That's not built into MATILDA. No,
But
it won't help
will
you.
give some
It won't help. MATILDA cannot possibly help you with the creativity required to think of a new algorithmic idea. If I presented this case study, you would have seen I did have a new algorithmic idea inspired by the insights because I could see I could see a feature that correlated very well with the truth, and so I designed a new algorithm that used that feature. Yeah.
So I guess my question was, when you say a new algorithm or some insight towards it, do you also consider running several algorithms, and it's one after the other, instead of trying to handpick best feature in some of the annual characteristics? That is, what stops you running both the taboo and the other one?
Oh, I mean, we have run you have to run all algorithms on all problems to be able to learn good and bad.
To say if you come to this problem, you have to run both to get a better solution or something.
So you could have a third algorithm, which was run taboo search for 1,000 iterations and then switch strategy and run simulated annealing to the end. That would be another algorithm, a hybrid algorithm, right? So there's nothing stopping you in your algorithm portfolio having individual algorithms, having hybridized algorithms, having meta algorithms, whatever. In the end, your question is, when should I use that one?
Yeah, you get to see.
What and how do you measure success? So maybe you get a better result doing that way, but it takes twice as long. And so you have choice also with your performance measure. Is my performance metric just how good was the solution? I don't care how long it took. Is my performance metric what is the computational cost to achieve a certain quality solution? You choose, in MATILDA, you choose what your performance metric is. You choose how you define good or bad performance. You choose everything, and then it will show you how you define good algorithm performance lies.
I think there's Mark, you just have one. Just one more question.
Okay, thanks.
What I was wondering about was the iteration of the feature space development. So what made me wonder about coming up from a deep learning kind of perspective, so a bit like anomaly detection, there's a bunch of work on adversarial example detection. So in that space, people have thought about, okay, so given this feature space, maybe what characterises the subspaces where you find adversarial examples is this, or this. And so the first work we did is, had this particular idea for this particular feature space, that this is what would characterise it, and you can build a classifier that does the detection. And the next work that came along said, well, actually, if this is the feature space, then the subspaces that characterise adversarial examples are really different, and we have this other method for building a detection classifier, and then a third one had a different feature space. And with all of those, there was a really big change in what these subspaces look like that characterise it. So this is something that maybe came up in anomaly detection, or maybe not for you, but I was wondering, when you do your iteration of the feature space, how radically does that change the instance spaces?
It's a good question. It's a question referees always ask, because in the paper we just show them one instance space, and then there's always the question about, but how robust is it to the different and so we always anticipate that, and we always, so when I say that we have an automated feature selection process, so those 5 features that got selected, if I ran it lots and lots of times, then it's a stochastic thing, but if I ran it lots and lots of times, I'd probably get the same 5 features most of the time, but one time there may be that feature replaced with another feature, or maybe there's 7 features or whatever. If I look at those alternative instance spaces, what you'll find most of the time is it's a rotation of the space, a stretching of the space, because the numbers are different in that linear transformation. And some of the features may be different, but the features that have been replaced are usually very correlated with the original ones or whatever. So many of my 32 features were correlated with each other that there are many alternative instance spaces, but essentially when you look at the space, it might look a little bit different, the shape of the space might be a tiny bit different, but when you scrutinise it for information, the relationships maintain. So it might be that in one space, the simulated annealing was good here and taboo search was good here. In another space, simulated annealing is good here and taboo search is there, but it's the same kind of gist. Yeah. So we consider them to be fairly robust in that sense.
Okay. Thank you, Kate, again for a great talk, and thank you all for coming.